Okay, so have you ever wondered, like, what makes someone a truly captivating speaker?
It's a great question. And, a lot of people think it's about like natural charisma or some secret stage presence.
Right, like you either have it or you don't.
But honestly, a lot of it boils down to understanding how our brains are wired, how we process information and make decisions.
Okay, so it's more about psychology than performance.
Precisely. And that's what we're diving into today, using some really fascinating insights from behavioral economics to become more persuasive and impactful speakers.
I love that. So we're basically hacking the human brain to get our message across.
In a way, yes. We're taking these proven principles from the world of behavioral economics and applying them to the art of communication.
And I think you had a specific book in mind as a framework for this, right?
Absolutely. It's the audiobook, How Highly Effective People Speak. It breaks down some really powerful strategies.
Awesome. Let's jump in. What's the first tool we're pulling out of this communication toolkit?
Let's start with the availability bias.
Okay, availability bias. Sounds intriguing already.
It explains why urban legends are so sticky, why we remember vivid stories more readily than statistics.
So you're saying a well-placed anecdote can be more persuasive than pages of data?
Precisely. Our brains naturally gravitate toward information that's easily recalled, and often a memorable story trumps cold, hard facts.
I see that. Like, I bet most people reading about shark attacks are more likely to remember that one news story about a surfer than actual statistics on how rare they are.
Exactly. We latch onto those vivid images and stories. And that's why if you want your message to really stick with someone, you need to make it memorable.
So ditch the boring bullet points and find those emotional hooks.
Exactly. Find those stories that resonate, those anecdotes that truly connect. Think about Ronald Reagan, one of the most effective communicators of our time.
Yeah, he was known for his storytelling, right?
Absolutely. His A Time for Choosing speech is a masterclass in using contrast to make a point.
You mean how he contrasted, like, freedom and, what did he call it? The anti-totalitarianism.
Exactly. Powerful imagery. And that takes us to our next tool, the contrast effect.
Okay, hit me with it. What's the contrast effect?
It's all about perspective. We understand things more clearly when we can compare and contrast them, like black seems blacker against a white background.
Right, right. It's all relative.
And the same principle applies to how we present our ideas. By deliberately highlighting the contrast between our preferred choice and the alternatives, we make that choice seem even more appealing.
Okay, I can see that. It's like when you're choosing between a plain black coffee and a decadent mocha latte with whipped cream.
Yeah.
Suddenly that black coffee feels very, very boring.
Exactly. You frame the choice, you highlight the contrast, and suddenly the decision becomes much clearer.
So it's about using those contrasts strategically to guide your audience toward your desired outcome.
Absolutely. And you know what else plays into those decisions? Our natural aversion to loss, which leads us nicely into our next bias, the zero risk bias.
Zero risk. So we like playing it safe.
To a degree, yes. We're naturally drawn to options that minimize potential downsides, even if it means sacrificing a slightly bigger reward. It's why those money-back guarantees are so effective in advertising.
Totally. I've fallen for those myself. Even if the product is slightly more expensive, that guarantee makes it feel like a safer bet.
It's about peace of mind, right? You're minimizing the perceived risk.
Okay, but we can't all offer money-back guarantees on every idea we present, right?
True. But you can apply the principle. Think about how you can emphasize the aspect of your message that minimize perceived risk. Highlight what makes it a safe and reliable choice.
It's about removing those mental barriers that might be holding someone back from fully embracing what you're saying.
Precisely. And speaking of barriers, let's talk about first impressions, because you know what they say.
You never get a second chance.
Exactly. And that brings us to the halo effect, which underscores just how powerful those initial perceptions really are.
Okay, so first impressions are huge. We all know that. But how does this halo effect actually play out, say, if I'm giving a presentation?
It's all about those subtle cues that create a positive aura.
Yeah.
Your attire, your body language, even your tone of voice can make a huge difference.
So are you saying I need to channel my inner JFK and ooze charisma? Because I'm not sure I can pull that off.
No need for a full-on JFK impersonation. It's more about those small things that project confidence. Like, think about how you're standing. Are you making eye contact? Are you smiling?
So it's not about becoming someone you're not. It's just about putting your best foot forward.
Exactly. People pick up on those subtle cues, and a genuine, confident presence can really make your message resonate. It goes back to that idea of making a strong first impression and how it colors everything that follows.
Because we tend to trust those we perceive favorably. Like that halo creates this aura of competence and trustworthiness, right?
Exactly. So we've got the zero risk bias to minimize risk, the halo effect for that stellar first impression. What's next in our persuasive speaker's arsenal?
You're really building up the intrigue here. What else do we have to play with?
Let's talk about attribute substitution. Now, this one might sound a bit technical, but it's actually quite intuitive.
Okay, demystify it for me.
Basically, our brains are efficient machines. When faced with a complex decision, they often look for shortcuts. So instead of grappling with all the intricacies, we substitute the tough question with a simpler, related one.
Okay, give me a real-world example. Help me wrap my head around this.
Think about those rules of thumb we use all the time, like measure twice, cut once. It's not always the most accurate method, but it's a quick and easy guideline.
Ah, so we're drawn to those simplified versions, those mental shortcuts. But how do we use this attribute substitution thing when we're trying to be persuasive? Are we supposed to, like, oversimplify our message?
Not necessarily oversimplify. It's more about understanding that people are more likely to accept an argument if it's easy to process and aligns with their existing beliefs.
Find that common ground. So it's not about dumbing it down. It's about building those bridges of understanding. Show your audience you get them, you relate to their worldview, and suddenly your message becomes much more palatable.
Exactly. And another effective way to employ attribute substitution: lean on credible sources.
Ah, so instead of having to do all the research ourselves, we rely on trusted voices.
Right. Mention experts, cite studies, reference reputable organizations. It's a way of borrowing their authority to bolster your own arguments.
It's like a shortcut to credibility. Because let's face it, we live in a world of information overload. No one has time to fact-check everything.
Absolutely. And that's precisely why understanding these biases is so crucial, both as speakers and as listeners. It's about becoming more discerning consumers of information and more impactful communicators.
We got to be aware of how our brains are wired, both to craft more persuasive messages and to make sure we're not being swayed by manipulative tactics.
Precisely. It's about wielding this knowledge responsibly and ethically.
It's like we've uncovered this hidden language of persuasion, these subconscious triggers that influence how we think and act.
And the best part is we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
There are so many more fascinating biases explored in how highly effective people speak, like the reciprocity bias. Have you heard of this one?
Reciprocity. Does it have anything to do with bicycles?
Not quite, although I do appreciate a good wordplay. This one's all about our natural inclination to return favors. It's why, think about this, those free samples at the grocery store, they work wonders.
Oh, absolutely. A little taste of that gourmet cheese and suddenly I'm walking out with the whole wheel.
Exactly, because when you receive something, even something small, it triggers this sense of obligation. You're more likely to reciprocate, even if it's just by listening to what the other person has to say.
So are we talking about bribing our audience? Free gifts with every presentation?
No, not at all. It's not about literal gifts. It's about finding genuine ways to provide value up front. Maybe it's sharing a helpful resource. Maybe it's offering a unique perspective.
So it's more about building that goodwill, that sense of mutual benefit.
Exactly. And speaking of influence, that ties in nicely with another powerful bias: the bandwagon effect.
Oh, I know this one. It's like when you're walking down the street and you see this huge line outside a club. You've never even heard of this place, but suddenly you're convinced it must be the hottest spot in town.
Precisely. We're social creatures at heart, and we're naturally drawn to what's popular. It's like this innate need to follow the crowd, to do what everyone else is doing.
Which explains why those 9 out of 10 dentists recommend ads are so darn effective.
Exactly. Because we trust social proof. Testimonials, case studies, even just mentioning that others have had a positive experience with whatever you're promoting it can really move the needle.
Okay, so we've got reciprocity, we've got the bandwagon effect. What other persuasive gems did you uncover in how highly effective people speak?
Well, there's the scarcity bias, which taps into our fear of missing out. It explains why limited time offers and exclusive deals are so enticing. We place a higher value on things that are scarce.
It's that get it while it lasts mentality. I totally fall for that, especially when it comes to online deals.
We're all susceptible to it. And lastly, we have the authority bias.
Okay, authority bias, lay it on me. What's that all about?
It explains why we're more likely to trust people in positions of authority, even if their expertise is in question.
It's like that saying, because I said so. My parents used to love that one. But it's true, we do tend to defer to those we perceive as experts, those in positions of power.
It's a powerful bias to be aware of, both as a speaker, someone who might want to leverage that authority, but also as a listener to make sure we're not being swayed by empty credentials.
This has been an amazing deep dive, so many practical insights, and I love how this book really breaks down the science of persuasion in such an accessible way.
And the most important thing to remember, these are just tools. How we use them, that's up to us.
It's about being ethical, responsible, and always striving to use these tools for good. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Deep Dive.
It's been a pleasure.
To our amazing listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the fascinating worlds of cognitive biases and effective communication. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.